Sony threw a surprise out today with the announcement of the A9 Mark II. Now, this was just an announcement. There was no official press release, there's no hands-on reviews or anything like that yet. It was just them saying this is what the A9 Mark II is. And already there's quite a lot of backlash. But is it justified? Well, let's look at the specs of the A9 Mark II. Bearing in mind that this is primarily a camera focused towards still shooters around sport and wildlife. So we have a 24 megapixel sensor, capable of shooting up to 20 frames a second. It has an autofocus system that covers 93% of the sensor and consists of 693 phase detect points and 425 contrast detect points. This all sounds very familiar. And that's because it essentially is exactly what's fitted in the A9. It's fitted with the same 24 megapixel sensor as the original A9, which is a bit of a surprise. We all thought there was going to be a bump in resolution. I know I predicted it last year when Sony announced the two new sensors, the 60 megapixel and 36 megapixel, and I thought one would be in the A7R4 and one would be in the A9 Mark II. There was even rumours surfacing a few weeks ago that concurred that the A9 Mark II would get the 36 megapixel sensor, but it didn't. Turns out I was right about the A7R4, wrong about the A9 Mark II. What can you do? The A9 Mark II matches the A9 in the 20 frames a second shooting speed, although both of those are on the electronic shutter. The only difference is the mechanical shutter's been changed, whereas the original A9's mechanical shutter could only shoot 5 frames a second, the A9 Mark II can go up to 10 frames a second. Well, hopefully the 10 frames a second mechanical shutter isn't the same shutter that's in the A7 III, because that's getting a bit of bad press at the moment. And to be honest, 10 frames a second mechanical shutter is a little bit disappointing for a pro-level sports camera. I know the vast majority of shooters will probably be using electronic shutter anyway, but if you're going to upgrade the mechanical shutter, at least make it something half decent. Bearing in mind, the A7 III, the A7R4 both shoot at 10 frames a second already, and you've got cameras like the 1DX Mark II and the Nikon D5 that are shooting like 14 frames a second. So the mechanical shutter side of the A9 Mark II is still well behind the competition. It's only the electronic shutter that's saving them. And the autofocus system appears to be exactly the same that's in the original A9 as well. Now, I know the press release and all the palaver that all the retailers use for trying to peddle all this stuff out talks about the outrageously powerful AF system, the out-of-this-world fast hybrid. But the fact is that it's got the same 93% coverage, the same number of autofocus points. It's got to be exactly the same system, maybe with a few minor tweaks. But then let's not forget, Sony have been working on this A9 Mark II for presumably quite a while. And yet only a month or two ago, they released brand new firmware for the original A9 that upgraded the autofocus performance and gave things like the real-time tracking. So I don't think the A9 Mark II is going to be that much faster than the original A9. Now, there obviously are some differences between the A9 and the A9 Mark II. You know, nobody's that stupid to just put out exactly the same camera and just change the badge. But the differences between them, at least off the information that we have so far, seems to be rather subtle. The card slots have been upgraded, so it's now 2 UHS 2 card slots rather than 1 UHS 2, 1 UHS 1. And there's now the inclusion of a USB Type-C port. But even the USB Type-C is a bit of a letdown for what's supposed to be a flagship camera. It's USB 3.2 Gen 1, which is essentially USB 3. They could have gone for Gen 2, which is double that, or they could have gone for Gen 2.2, which is quadruple that. Instead, they've gone for the measly Gen 1 for file transfer, not particularly impressive, and most people aren't going to be using that port for file transfer. It's also got 5 GHz connectivity for being able to wirelessly transfer stuff across, and it's also got a memo feature where you can speak at the camera and leave a verbal note for a particular image that then gets played back later in post-processing. Now, I've never personally spoke to anyone that's suggested needing anything like that. I've never seen sports photographers at the side of a pitch with a dictaphone running through all the information, but maybe that is something that people have been asking for. I know the only thing I've seen A9 users talk about as negatives to the A9 is shutter lag and also the buffer clearing speed at times, bearing in mind it locks the menu up. The A9 Mark II does at least see the slightly enlarged body that the A7R4 got, but then I'm not convinced how much of a difference that's going to make, seeing as how any time I've seen people using the A9 out in the wild, it's generally fitted with a battery grip anyway. The biggest thing in the press release for me is the improved in-body stabilization. It's rated up to 5.5 stops. Now, it's kind of well known that the IBIS system in Sony Now, it's kind of well known that the IBIS system in the Sony cameras isn't really the best compared to some of the competition. Particularly for when shooting video, it can be quite stuttery, although that's not going to be an issue for the A9, seeing as how the A9 is primarily used for stills. But I am hoping that this statement of improved IBIS turns out to be true, because then it means that it's going to trickle hopefully down into future cameras, the likes of the A7 IV. So it doesn't seem at face value like there is much difference between the A9 and the A9 Mark II. No doubt the A9 Mark II will be a fantastic camera because the original A9 is a fantastic camera. No doubt the A9 Mark II is better than the A9 because it takes the original A9 and makes a few tweaks. The bigger issue is the price. Currently on Wex UK, the pre-release price of the A9II is £4,800, whereas the original A9 on Wex is £3,400. So the A9 Mark II might be slightly better than the A9, but it doesn't look like it's going to be £1,400 better. So I think the biggest success of the A9 Mark II is going to be driving down the price of the A9 and making that more affordable for people. But what do you make of the A9 Mark II announcement? Do you think it's a worthy upgrade to the A9? Do you think it's a waste of space? Leave your thoughts and comments in the box down below. Thank you so much for stopping by, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.